Well, this is a very simple and yet challenging story. Simple in the sense that the overall focus of the story is how this main character, Frederick Morris, this guy here, how he fits into the new post-apartheid South Africa. So here's a white guy, a college professor who had worked on the right side of apartheid, seeking to help liberate South Africa, had been beaten by the police, threatened with arrest, done all these things, and now in the new order, where the black majority population finally runs their own country, he's wondering how he fits in. Does he have any toehold of legitimacy in the new South Africa? And so it's kind of a slippery story. Beethoven was 1/16th black is an odd appeal for the white classical music radio announcer to make, but it's pretty easy to see that they're saying, listen to Beethoven. After all, he was part black. He belongs. Kind of an odd connection, independent of historic veracity. It's just a possibility. And so, listen to Beethoven. He belongs. That kind of echoes the larger story, which is Frederick Morris is trying to find out whether or not his great-great-grandfather left any mixed blood descendants when he was in Africa 150 years earlier. And if so, then guess what? Frederick Morris has cousins in South Africa from his grandfather's time. And so that's kind of roughly the overall trajectory, but the compression is really amazing. How everything kind of echoes the largest theme, as I just mentioned with Beethoven is 1/16th black. Listen to Beethoven. He too has the same ancestry. He's a valid person. But then the references are kind of, well, let's say obscure. The Beethoven quartets, especially Opus 135, is one of the most challenging and sophisticated and wonderful pieces Beethoven ever wrote. So you get a lot of cultural references. And then also, as you move down a little bit further, you have a reference to Alexander Pushkin, who was the great Russian author, and who actually was part black. And he's considered Russia's Shakespeare. So again, you're going to have a lot of references that may be beyond your reading, just as they would have been beyond my reading. Where I, 19 or 23 or 4, I didn't know about all these people. So that's where it gets tricky, and I want you to look up all the references and all the words you don't know. Here, too, is, just a simple way of cooking it down. This is the story. Once there were blacks wanting to be white. Now there are whites wanting to be black. It's the same secret. And, of course, what Nadine Gordimer's idea of the same secret is that underneath it all, why would anybody want to be one or the other? We're all the same. The skin color is the most trivial of differences. How have we made such a mess of it? And so that's kind of her background philosophical view. But again, the story is, here's a white guy wanting to be black. Maybe his great-great-grandfather left a black-white cousin 150 years ago. Maybe, like the radio announcer in the classical station, maybe the icon of Western, white classical music, Beethoven, was part black. And so this is where you get it. And so the story is an interesting design, and I can't go into all the allusions. I'd talk for an hour and a half. But what I want you to do is read it carefully and look at those parts that signal what Frederick Morris, as a metaphor for the fictional character, metaphor for white people in general, what his standing is in South Africa post-apartheid. How does he fit in? Is he irrelevant? Is he a bystander? Is he a key player? That's really, is he a part of the active political mix that gets things done? Or has that game been handed over to the rightful leaders in South Africa, the black majority population? And is he kind of a bystander, looking on but not really having a voice? And the answer is pretty clear. It's the second one. Then he gives a background, some of his activities on the part of apartheid, and some really interesting slights of verbiage that you may not get on the first reading here. They refer to the transformation of the university from a white intellectuals country club to a non-racial institution with a black majority, politically correct speak. And it's a polite way of saying, basically, the South Africans, the black people are running the show. But they have to instead say it's non-racial because they can't be racist. So it's a non-racial institution with a black majority, which is kind of a muddy way of saying it's their game now. And it should be. It's their country. Nonetheless, so she's kind of making fun of how people don't even know how to talk about the new order. They don't have a language for it, so they kind of talk around it in strange ways that don't always make a lot of sense. But then she also talks about you can't be on somebody else's side. There's a reasoning. So the idea that in our stupidity of separating by people by color, we've created this sense where you're either on the white side or the black side. There's no in between. And that's kind of what this story is about in post-apartheid South Africa. The lines are still drawn. They're just drawn by the black majority rather than the white minority, as they had been up to the end of apartheid. So it's still part of our kind of natural human stupidity to divide each other by color, even though underneath all that, we're basically the same people. Well, so it goes. Human beings have their limitations. So here's the reference to Pushkin, who actually was part African, having to do with kind of the mix of colonialization and the Russian Empire in the late 1700s or 18th century. So, really good. And then notice the way it pivots backwards. Now we go back into Morris's history, the great-grandfather. I guess I got it wrong. It's just great-grandfather, not great-great. My apologies. I should have looked that up first. And now we go back into him, and then back into getting that picture of the great-grandfather, and back into the story of the great-grandfather coming from England to Africa, hoping to find some kind of wealth or opportunity in the mythical land of capital E elsewhere. So looking around, trying to find it. So we talk about him pulling up the picture of the grandfather, looking at the grandfather and seeing that this guy, he had it. This is a guy who was, let's say, a magnet. He had the attraction. Women must have noticed him. He must have noticed women. And then, having been separated, as the story goes on, from his wife in London or in England, and he would go back and visit periodically every year or two, a year and a half, let's just say he didn't go without sex during that time. No virile young man could be expected to do that. So that's where we get into the possibility of there's got to be a Morris bloodline cousin here, because his, pardon my French, horny great-grandfather couldn't have lasted that long. All right, so there, while he was away from London. So that's kind of the backstory. And again, it's all fictional, but it's part of this guy's journey. Is there any foothold this white English person could have in South Africa? Maybe a cousin from 150 years ago. That's what they're looking at, trying to get some kind of a connection. And lots of really good lines here, trying to get his legitimacy. And I want you to read it carefully and listen into it. I'm just kind of giving you an overview. There's also kind of a slippery movement of voices, because this is all memory here. This is all inner dialogue. This is all what he thinks about his grandfather, about maybe there's some connection back then. And then suddenly, almost without a border, then it shifts gears to him recalling a discussion he had with some of his colleagues at the university. So we kind of move into here, the black survivors of the street marches, the blacks and whites in the past get together for a drink. And these are the people with whom Frederick Morris joined arms to fight against apartheid, probably in the 60s and 70s. So they're kind of having a reunion. And they're talking about what's his place as somebody who fought on the right side of history in South Africa. I just want to let you know that it shifts into a scene. People in the 70s and 80s. And so this is a dialogue, and this is one of his black comrades commenting on what the current generation is doing, trashing the universities, which are their universities. Those aren't white universities. Why are they doing this? But so this kind of works in a two-way way, though, is that Morris can't weigh in on judgment. He can't say, why are they trashing the universities? Because he no longer has a voice in the political life of South Africa. But he can listen to his black friends talk about their outrage. So that's an interesting thing, is that he no longer has a legitimate voice to say, why are they trashing the university? It's not his game anymore. It's somebody else's. So that conversation, listening to his black comrades from the anti-apartheid age, you have to step back and say the fact that he has nothing to offer the conversation means that his voice is irrelevant. There you go. And so Nadine Gordimer is very subtle that way. And then we go back into the look, the search. Certainly there are men, women, children related thicker than the descendants' bloodstream. Do we have any connection back there? Did my great-grandfather leave anybody behind? And obviously there's a lot more that I wouldn't want to discuss, because this will go on for a week and a half. And so that's where it goes, back into, then he's back into the township by the Kimberley mine. You'll see a picture of that at the lead of this page. That's what's left. That is all that remains of his great-grandfather's time in South Africa. And of course, the other people who had the black people dig the wealth out of the country, hand it over to their white bosses, who then became rich on the resources and the labor of the rightful owners of South Africa, the black people who had been there for thousands and thousands of years. So it's just a wonderful, very compact story. There's so much I could love about this. I love the swing set. The idea of the kids fighting over who gets to play on, who gets to have the top position on the sort of monkey bar set, because it just shows that in the tumble of history, okay, the blacks were on top, then the whites were on top, now the blacks are on top, and it just kind of on and on and on, this ongoing jostling of who gets to be on top, and which is part of our inherited stupidity, because if we had any brains, we'd realize there is no reason to have one group or another on top based on the color of their skin. So he's just kind of talking about that when he goes over the playground scene. And then we end up here, there's a discussion over a soccer match. Guess who gets to talk about the score? Not him, but he can listen to the other black guys in the bar discuss the score, because they're the scorekeepers now. And then we roll out of it into the final scene of the big pit, the Kimberley, That's what's left. I'm going to leave it at that.